Chapter 8 Monster of the Deep. Sailors were on the top deck. They were yelling and pointing. The giant octopus loosened his hold on Jack and Annie. "The ship!" Jack gurgled before slipping under the water. His head popped back up. "Swim to the ship!" he shouted to Annie. Jack and Annie started swimming. The sky was still covered with clouds, and the sea was still rough. But arm over arm, they swam until they got close to the ladder on the side of the ship. "Ahoy!" someone shouted from above. Jack looked up and saw Henry and the professor standing at the top of the ladder. "Climb up!" yelled Henry. "Hurry, children, hurry!" cried the professor, "before it comes back!" Jack swam as fast as he could to the ladder. He and Annie got there at the same time. They pulled themselves onto the ladder and climbed. When they reached the top, Henry and the professor helped them get on the deck. Henry wrapped wool blankets around them. "Thank goodness you were saved," said the professor. "I thought you were below in the hold," said Henry. "How did you end up in the water?" "The storm, the waves," gasped Jack, shivering. "The waves threw us overboard," said Annie. "Why were you up on deck?" said Henry. I was seasick," said Jack. "I followed Jack and big waves came crashing down and washed us into the water," said Annie. "Our life vests saved us at first," said Jack, "but then they came off." "Then the octopus saved us," said Annie. "That monster saved you?" asked the professor. No, not a monster," said Jack. "A giant octopus." "Yes, the monster of the deep. I do not think it saved you, boy," said the professor. "It's a miracle it did not eat you and your sister alive." No, he's not a monster. He didn't try to do any of that," said Jack. "He did save us," said Annie. "He held us up above the water." "Really?" said Jack. "He kept us from drowning. Then he got scared away by the ship." "We didn't even thank him, Jack," said Annie. "We didn't say goodbye." Jack and Annie looked back at the water. "Hey, what's going on over there?" said Annie. She pointed to the rear of the ship. Sailors were facing the sea, yelling and shouting. "What are they yelling at?" Annie asked. Jack and Annie threw off their blankets and took off across the deck. They saw Joe and Tommy standing at the edge of the crowd. "What are they doing?" Annie yelled. "What's going on?" "They snared it in the net," shouted Tommy. "We've caught the beast at last," shouted Joe. "Caught it?" Annie looked at Jack. "Come on," Jack cried. He and Annie pushed their way through the crowd. "Children, stop!" the professor shouted, scurrying after them. "Don't get in the way!" But Jack and Annie squeezed through the crowd of sailors and scientists until they got to the railing of the ship. They looked down. The giant octopus was tangled in a net. His arms were churning the seawater into foam. His body had turned bright red. A cloud of dark ink billowed around him. "You're hurting him!" Annie yelled. "Leave him alone!" "Move away!" yelled the sailor. Some of the sailors were yelling mean things at the octopus. Others seemed terrified. Even the captain was caught up in the panic. "Stand back!" he shouted. "It could be powerful enough to sink the ship." "That's crazy!" yelled Jack. "Leave him alone!" "Its tentacles are as hard as steel," shouted one of the sailors. "No, they're not!" cried Annie. "They're soft! They saved us from drowning!" But everyone kept shouting. "Hungry for human flesh! Devour a man in one bite! Thirsty for blood!" "He's not any of those things!" yelled Annie. "Throw the harpoons!" yelled a sailor. "Get your axes, swords, and knives!" yelled another. "Ready the guns!" said the captain. "No!" screamed Jack and Annie. "The children are right!" shouted the professor. He and Henry had squeezed through the crowd too. They were standing behind Jack and Annie. Jack felt a rush of relief. "The professor says we're right!" yelled Annie. "Do not destroy it, Captain!" roared the professor. "Haul it on board!" "On board?" said Jack. "Capture it alive and whole," said the professor. His eyes gleamed. "So we can study it." "No, no, let him go," said Jack. "Just let him swim away and be free." "Please," screamed Annie, "let him go." But neither the professor nor the captain seemed to hear Jack and Annie. They were too busy arguing over what to do with the giant octopus. "We must kill it, Professor," said the captain. "It could grab the hull and drag the ship down to the bottom." "But science needs it alive," said the professor. "At least till we have examined it." By now the octopus has gathered his long arms around himself, as if for protection. Annie burst into tears. "Henry, help him!" she sobbed. "Don't let them kill him or capture him." Henry looked upset too. "Excuse me, sirs," he shouted. "Excuse me. The girl is right. We should let him go." But no one listened to Henry either. "Jack!" cried Annie. She grabbed Jack. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Save him! We have to save him!" "What can we do? We've tried everything," said Jack. Then he remembered. His own words helped him remember too, and Jack knew exactly what to do.